So today's article, first of all, today's article we're going to talk about this, how else would you take a photo, hashtag selfie ambivalence, by Combré and Levrance. First we'll just start out with general reactions to the articles, this article. Do you guys remember this article from this weekend?
Mm-hmm.
What did you think of it?
What was the good topic?
It's an interesting topic. Any other reactions? Guessing that there's a lot we can pull out and talk about from this because it's pretty dense, right? There's a lot of nods to things, terms that get thrown around that I'm guessing you guys aren't familiar with, which is a good practice for you guys because, like, in just a general rule, when you're reading academic literature, nobody knows all the things that are being cited, you know. And even like now, so like graduate school started for me 13 years ago. You know, so like after undergrad, 13 extra years plus 10, you know, I still often will come across things that I don't know what they are. You know, so that's just how it works, right? We all read different literatures, we're all engaged in it, but that doesn't mean that we can't like find ways of needling in. So if you guys, so I'm going to start today, and I think we're just going to try to hit the main point by leaping forward and taking some of these fantastic quotes that they get from. Did anybody catch what kind of study this is? What the author's doing? You could even keep this as simple as quantitative and qualitative. What we talked about before. Types of research. Once again, I said this before, bring your electronic devices and get it up before class starts if you have the forethought and ability to do that. So. What kind of stuff is it looking at?
Theoretical.
So it's very theoretical, yeah. It's definitely on the theoretical side of things, right? And that's one of the reasons why it's so dense. But then when it actually comes down to like actual methods it's using, what is it looking at? Where does it draw all these quotes from in the last half of the article? It's qualitative. It's doing a study. It's essentially, the type of study is something called I'm blanking on it now. Why am I blanking on it? It's one of those things where the word's on top of your tip of your tongue and you've forgotten it. Focus group. So a focus group, right? Do you guys ever see a focus group like on television? What do focus groups do? What sort of things that might happen in a focus group from what your stereotype is? This is something that's like on comedy shows all the time.
How they focus on a specific topic and like brainstorm for that topic?
Yeah, they bring in a bunch of random people and then ask them questions. And usually it's about like, we think of this mostly like companies do this, so it's like, you know, they're gonna like have a new type of Coke, so they bring a group of people in and they have them taste the Coke and then they start asking them questions. You can use focus groups for all kinds of things. This is in particular, the person's doing focus groups where they're talking to people about taking selfies, right? And so that's what it uses as its data. The rest of the theoretical stuff, the stuff at the beginning, right, is what it's using to interpret those claims, right? Okay, so if you're following along in the text, scroll on down to page 511. So, and this is where the work gets, I guess, like its original stuff starts coming through, right? And so our authors they pick up on several different themes that they pull out of what these people are saying in focus groups about their selfie taking. And in particular, each of these themes is a contradiction, right? That they're finding all these weird ways in which people say contradictory things. We'll get into why that's significant as we move along. So on 511, there's a big box quote. Often in qualitative stuff, if you look, you know, an article like this, you'll see that they don't even they don't take out all the pauses and awkward things that people say. They leave it right in there so you can see it. That's very different from like, you know, polished writing. But anyways, here's the quote. So and this is them talking about control. So the first contradiction is control versus it's control versus vulnerability, right? And so there's something really interesting that people are simultaneously talking about being in control, right, while talking about being vulnerable. And here's the first quote. There's such perfect control when you take your picture. You can really make it so it brings out your best features. What you think looks pretty to someone else, or I mean for yourself, and you want to share it with everyone. So this is what I think, how I think I look the best. You can make your face slimmer, your skin cleaner, your eyes bigger. You have so much control over every aspect of your face. That is the best part of it. So this is why somebody says that they like taking selfies. What's interesting about that? What do you think? What is our author interested in this? You can look over the text surrounding it, or you can just guess if you find something that jumps out to you.
How they're able to like manipulate all their features in the face.
So yeah, we all know what this is referencing for in terms of selfie stuff, right? Like, it's not, you can do Photoshop things, but there's also all these like apps where you can like change, and it can be like change in all kinds of weird ways. Like you might have butterflies coming off of you or whatever, right? You might give yourself cat ears, right? Whatever you want to do, there's like all these things that can alter your appearance. Some of which are quite literally like changing you to make you look more attractive. And it has a reference to one of these sort of selfie apps where you take a picture of yourself and then it changes the image to make you more attractive, right? So yeah, that's one thing. What else is being brought out in this quote? How do we see a contradiction in this quote? Because it's a contradictory statement.
I don't know if this is exactly what you're thinking of, but I just think it's almost ironic how it's more of an illusion of control, because, just people with this opinion, they believe that they have the control to make themselves appear a certain way, but it's completely unrealistic or fake.
Yeah.
And so it's not really true control.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So there's a tension between the real you and the you put in selfies. Did you have something you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, it kind of goes with what she was saying. It's kind of contradictory to say that like this will be pretty to someone else or like for myself because everyone has different opinions. And so like even if you edit it to make your face look exactly how you want it to look, there's going to be at least one person that's going to see it and be like, I don't like that. Like I don't like how she looks. So it's like, but if you do it any other way, then it's not how you want it. So it's just like there's really no control there because someone's always not going to like it.
We're going to dig into a little bit, like there's a weird slip that the speaker has. Did you have something as well?
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say kind of what she was saying. Like she talks about how she starts off by saying like what you think looks prettiest to someone else, and then she goes back and says, but for yourself, it's hard to tell like what she's really going for. If it's like so much for yourself,
Yeah.
not for other people.
It seems almost like, just like in that one little part, that like someone else is controlling you because you're choosing something because of someone else.
Yeah, and that's where the author will take us, is this like, it's weird because she almost interrupts herself to say that it's for her, right? So she's saying like, I change myself to see what looks good to other people. There's a very similar quote that actually opens the entire article. So this is at the very top of the introduction. So the very first page, which I guess would be page 503. Journals are often thousands of pages long. So this one, does somebody else want to read so it's not my voice all the time? I can also read. It's up to you guys.
I think you got it.
You want me to read? Okay, that's cool. So this one reads, I don't want people to think I don't have a life. I want a level of respectability when you look at my photo. But at the same time, it's for me because, you know, I like that I can look at these photos and kind of project the person I want people to see. And you can't tell, you know, I don't know, that I have some mental health issues. And you look at that picture and you can't tell because I've done such a great job taking the angle or my hair or see what I want, and you see what I want you to see. And at the same time, it's for me because I'm projecting who I am, and there's truth to that photo, whether or not it's edited. So why did I bring that up in the context of that previous quote? How is it similar? How do we see similar things happening there?
It's the same contradiction as the last one because she says it's for me, but she's like manipulating it and like hiding behind it almost.
Yeah, so yeah, that's definitely a part of it is this sort of like hiding behind it thing is both here. Did you have
Kind
something
of
else?
going off of what she was saying, it talks about like hiding things like mental issues and stuff, but then at the end it says that there's truth in it. So it's like kind of a contradiction there because it's like I'm hiding the truth, but also there is truth.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like, well, I guess there's two parts. One, I think you see the same thing that how can it be for herself if she's just doing it all for other people? But also, I think even if it was for herself, is that really something to be valued too? Because I think people do that to kind of justify their actions, but then if they were doing it for themselves, would it be just to have a bunch of pictures of themselves? Like, what does that lead us to as well?
Yeah, yeah. So I think, yeah, we're definitely getting into some of the, and so, okay, so this article comes from a particular, like, tradition within sociology that when you come across things that are contradictory, you know, we talked about how there's sort of hidden context to our lives. To some degree, that's how you could take this whole discussion we had at the very beginning about time, space, and structure, right? Is that there's actually this entire sort of sociological or social construct that surrounds us, this context, right? And to some degree, like, what we often feel like as individual is actually latently not. It's actually the influence it's actually the influence of our place within institutions, in particular in this context, but also, you know, we could add time and space in there as well. So like, because our institutions often send us messages that are very different from what we have to do, what it wants from us. And we'll see what I mean by that as an example from this, right? When we find these contradictions, it's actually like really meaningful because it's actually this moment where social structure is talking to through us, right? It's kind of what the tradition wants to claim. So in this contradiction, you can see something, a contradiction within our society being played out in the individual people. Right? Because in the end, why do we think we do everything we do? As Americans, how do we generally explain our own behavior? You got up this morning and put on clothes. Why did you do what you did?
That's what everybody does, so that's what you have to do.
Well, everybody has to wear clothes. Not everybody wears the same clothes, right?
It's like for you, it's something that makes you feel better about yourself or, you know, more confident.
So-
You do it for you.
Yeah, you do it for you. Often we talk about it in terms of choice. Like, I got up and I put on clothes and it was my choice. I picked out what I wore, right? We often think about things as our own choices, but there's actually a whole context to what we wear. It's really ironic if you think about it that we talk about making choices in what we wear, yet by and large we all wear the same things often, and especially in different situations, right? So like when you come to school, you dress a certain way because you're a student. When I come to school, I have to dress a little bit differently, or at least I try to. Operative word being a little bit. I try to as little as I feel like I can get away with. Someday when I make tenure, like full-on tenure, I'm totally just going to show up in a t-shirt and jeans every day. But anyways, you know, so there's a whole context to why we pick out the things that we pick out. There's also like things like advertising and stuff that actually, like, everyone, have you ever noticed nobody thinks advertising works? You talk to any individual person and they're always like, advertisement doesn't do anything to me. I don't really pay attention to it. I don't actually buy what I want. I just go and I pick whatever I want, right? And yet, why would corporations spend billions of dollars a year on advertising if everybody just picked out whatever they wanted? Do you see this contradiction, right? So individualism, and there's a lot of stuff about individualism, that's one of the major themes, is that one of the contradictions that we see in our society is that while we claim to have individualism, often what we do within society, especially modern societies, is even more prescriptive than what came before it. Right? That in some ways our choices are even more limited and narrowed than what people have before in society. Yet we often, so to some degree it's like we're talking out of one side of our mouth and then doing something very different, right? And so that's actually the tension that's being pulled on here.
What's the difference between prescriptivism and like collectivism? Because often like that's the like opposite of individualism.
Yeah. So collectivism has a lot to do with communities you belong to, right? So like if you belong collectivistically to like a given like, you know, if we think about like taking an example of a different kind of society, right? Something very small, like, you know, a group of people who, you know, herd horses in, back a long time ago, right? And you live off of like basically like horse milk, something like that, right? They have a very collectivistic culture. Everybody does the same thing. By and large, everybody belongs to the same religion, et cetera, et cetera. But actual individual differences between people are generally not super regulated. There's an irony that we have choices in modernity, yet we're actually like, and a good example of this is if we think about how we think about our own bodies, right? So like, we are constantly being told to regulate how much we eat, how much we exercise. We're told if we don't fit a certain body type to feel guilty about that, right? And this is, it's a bit genderized on one level, but actually like everybody's actually prescribed to do it as well, right? So like this is often referred to something as biopolitics, that we're forced to monitor ourselves. And this is when, did you catch when they talked about the gaze in the article? They kept on bringing this up. G-A-Z-E, gaze, right? It was like the imperial gaze, the panoptic gaze, like et cetera, right? The masculine gaze. Anyways, the idea that this idea of the gaze, which comes from Foucault, so you saw that name jumping around a lot. The idea of the gaze, which comes out of Foucault, is the idea is that in essence we now live in a society where we're expected to police ourselves. So I'm going to step back a little bit and then show how this connects. So if we, one of Foucault's major works is called Discipline and Punishment. And in this he outlines the birth of prisons. So like we have a tendency to transhistoricize. Do you remember me saying that I was going to use that word a lot, right? Do you guys remember what transhistoricize means? But we make a transhistorical claim. What does that mean?
Moving through history.
Moving through, it's, oh, I heard a hesitant.
I said moving through history.
Yeah, that it goes across history. Yeah, it moves through history. It's across time. We have a tendency, I think prisons is one of those things that we kind of assume prisons have always existed. Does anybody actually know when prisons started to exist? Does anybody know this? First prisons were built in the early 1800s. It's very new. This is different from a jail. Jails are different, right? Does anybody know the distinction between a prison and a jail? We still have this distinction. Jail's where you get put temporarily when you get arrested until they decide what to do with you. Jails have a much longer history, so like, you know, jails to some degree date back to like ancient times, but like basically like they held you there until they decided to torture you or hang you or whatever, right? Which is very different from a prison, because the prison is the punishment itself, right? You just stay in prison and that's your punishment. Okay, so along those lines of this birth of the prison, right? Foucault wants to say that there's, one, it's interesting when it happens, right? That like with democratization and individuality, right, we get this birth of this prison. But the first prisons had a really weird kind of model to them, which I think what Foucault thinks is really significant. And this is referred to as the panopticon. And this actually might come up in a lot of articles, because Foucault is maybe the most famous sociologist, like currently. So he pops up a lot. But anyways, panopticon, and the structure of the prison was sort of like you had a guard, and this was originally invented by somebody by the name of Jeremy Bentham, who's an important philosopher. If you're just in a different class and that name comes up, this is the guy who invented the panopticon. Anyways, it had this guard tower in the center, right? And then around it were all the cells, right? And the cells had open bars facing this guard tower. And it was basically designed so that 24 hours a day, no matter what the prisoners were doing and no matter where they were, they knew that somebody was watching them. Why would you do that? What would be the idea behind something like that?
You're controlling them through that fear. Like, they're not going to act out because they know that someone's watching them, someone could like shoot them, or like, I don't know, you know, they get in trouble for, you know, trying to escape or anything because they don't know exactly who's watching them and when.
Yeah.
It's all right there.
Yeah, that's totally right. I'm going to rephrase it slightly. It's made so that the prisoners don't have to be policed, because they police themselves,
Yeah,
right?
Has to be in the tower.
Yeah, they internalize the gaze, right? So that's how the language would work in Foucault, right? They internalize the carceral gaze, the gaze of the police, right? And essentially, like, that's actually the idea behind policing, right? Like, before, also around the same era that the prison is invented, we also get this invention of policing. Policing doesn't really exist before that. Before you essentially have people who are called inquisitioners. Inquisitioners show up after the fact and they just kind of try to figure out what's happening, right? Police are very different. What do police do? When do you see police generally in your day-to-day lives?
On patrol.
Yeah, most of what police do is just drive around, right? Why do they do that? Why do police drive around all the time? Why don't they just go when people call?
I guess just like the prison, like it's just to instill like a tiny bit of fear, so that way you're like, oh, I don't want to do something wrong because I know he's probably around here somewhere doing something.
Yeah, so it's us altering our behavior because we know we're being watched. Okay, so let's back up and think about that quote again. I'm going to start with the first one again. Or if you guys have it up, you can just look. Do you guys want me to reread it aloud for those of you who don't have one with you? Nobody care? Or would you like me to read it aloud? Okay.
Just do it.
So I'll reread this. This is the one on 511. There's such perfect control when you take your picture. You can really make it so it brings out your best features. What you think looks prettiest to someone else, or I mean for yourself. And you want to share it with everyone. So why is this, getting back to what I originally asked, right? Why is it the author hones in on this example? Do you guys hear that? How would you put that in Foucault language? What is she actually saying here? What's the significance of that shift, right? For someone else, for myself. When do you think you look good?
I mean, it's kind of the idea that like everyone's watching you, so like you're aware that everyone's watching you, so you wanna like look the best or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, like you could say, like, why is it that in modern societies we're more obsessed with our bodies, right? And this is exactly where Foucault would take us, because he actually writes a separate book about our bodies and how we feel about our bodies, right? In essence, the reason we feel the way we do about our bodies is because, not because when we look at it, we see something. We actually take on somebody else looking at us and see ourselves through that. Right? So this is essentially what these people are latently kind of saying, right? Like when I put up my selfie, like I get to change myself so that I look the way that, right, the masculine gaze, the imperial gaze, the whichever term you want to use, Foucauldian term you want to use here, right? That the gaze thinks that we should look like, right? So that makes sense? So that's the first contradiction we get, is this contradiction between control and I always forget the word that he used for that. It's control and vulnerability. Because really, like when we put our picture up, we're actually rendering ourselves vulnerable, right? Like we're actually rendering ourselves to scrutiny, and these people are expressing that, right, on some level. So you can hear this in some of the later quotes, right? You get a lot of, so there's one on 5:12, right, that reads, it's super easy to just say, oh, it's a bad one, selfie, delete. It is, but you know, this is my worst experience with selfies. When it brings when it does bring up that reflection of, oh, maybe I'm not taking care of myself as much as I should, you know, it does reflect back on you something. So what you see in it is up to you. So if I'm in the back of my mind worrying, oh, am I taking care of myself? And then I take this selfie and I look and I have bags under my eyes and I have weird skin complexion, then I'm like, okay, maybe I'm not taking good care of myself after all. So how do we see the other end of this contradiction here, this vulnerability of the selfie? Let me think about, we can think about this outside of the quote. What pictures do you delete? We take a lot more pictures of ourselves than we ever did, right? Like, I used to live, you know, when I grew up as a little kid, I hate that I'm getting old enough to give the when I was a child stories in class, but the only kind of camera I had was the cheap kind that you bought that was disposable, and you take the picture and you had to. And it was like 20 pictures cost you like $10. So it was like, you know, like $2 a picture or whatever, 50 cents a picture. So how many pictures do you think you took? You'd like go on vacation and you'd buy one camera, and then you'd save it because you wanted to get a good picture of yourself to, like, I don't know, give to somebody back home. Right? And you'd like, you would hoard your shots, right? Like, because you also have to, like, that's just to buy the camera. Then you gotta go get it developed, and you gotta pay the developer to develop that film, etc. Right? So you took very few pictures. You took more pictures than people a long time ago, where it was really expensive, right? Like my grandfather maybe has 20, 30 pictures of himself for his first like 70 years of his life. You know, when you think about like a lot of us take more than that in like a few days sometimes, right? So what pictures do you delete of yourself as a general rule? So you get the ones that are like fuzzy and you're moving and they don't look good, or the lighting sucked or whatever. But what other ones do you delete?
Probably just ones that like, we don't think we look good in.
Yeah, and so what's the cognitive effect of taking a lot of photos you delete of yourself?
You get like a bad self-image because you're like, oh, that doesn't look good. Oh, that doesn't look good. Oh, that doesn't look good.
Yeah, because in reality, like the ones where you look good and the ones that you look bad, they're both you, right? So like, and on some like level, you know that you're the one sorting through those things, right? So like, while you could say the ability in this case to delete, because like, you know, before you had digital cameras, like, you didn't delete Jack. Like, you just didn't, right? Like, because you spent way too much money on that photo to throw it away. So like, you know, you have photos of yourself with red eye, photos of yourself where you're like, I don't know, like hunched over and you look like Bigfoot walking through the woods. I have one in particular from when I was a child that I hated it as a child because I looked like Bigfoot, right? Kind of looked like Bigfoot anyways. But anyways, like the point, well, obviously, like here you get it, right? Like I'm policing myself in this very moment, just like these people were, right? Like I'm thinking of my own body. And what do I think about? I think about bad photos I had. How much more so when we're inundated by that stuff? So there's a strong amount of vulnerability, right? And then, you know, going back to like that control actually is an expression rather than of our individualism, right? It's actually an expression of us being controlled by social authority.
And I think there's like an aspect of almost like a, I don't know what the word is, you have like almost too much control with it because when you know you can't take a million pictures, like if you're taking selfies and just like take another one, or you're taking pictures with your friends, you find one little thing you don't like about it because it's so easy to take another picture. That's I think where we become too critical.
Yeah.
And so because we have so much control, then we just completely overstepped the line.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that's kind of just become like not moderate, I guess, whatever the word is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just kind of lost the you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, definitely. Other people. There's another famous related thinker who this article doesn't cite, but he's related to Foucault. He's from Central Europe in some place. His name is Slavoj Žižek, and Žižek says that at the moments when we feel most comfortable, right, where we feel like we're in the most control, that we're actually being the most controlled. Right? And I think you see this a lot here, right? That like what I assume is natural and easy, right, is actually false. Right? And what is actually like, so like in this way, like society like tells us to do things, we do them, we feel good about it, right? He compares, one of the things is he compares it to like drinking Coca-Cola. Like have you ever seen a Coca-Cola commercial? They play these in, I don't watch television like that has commercials, because like who does that anymore? Like, you know, that's what Netflix exists for, so I don't have to be inundated with advertisements. But like if I go to the movie theaters, they always have these Coca-Cola commercials, and they're always like, you know, somebody like cracks a Coke while they're getting their car washed, and then all of a sudden it turns into this wild and crazy party. You know, it's like as if like drinking Coca-Cola changed your reality, as if it was like, I don't know, like dropping acid or something, right? But in reality, what is Coke like? Not like that, right? Have you ever drank Coke when you were thirsty?
Yeah.
What happens when you drink Coke when you're thirsty? You get more thirsty. Right? Like Coke's best drink when it's like, when you're not actually thirsty. Because it gets sticky, because it's like got so much sugar in it, it gets sticky in your mouth. I'm not like a health nut. I'm not hating on Coca-Cola. But what I'm saying is like, it's weird that like we often like, in the advertisements themselves, always, what's the slogan for Coca-Cola right now? Refresh, right? No one's ever refreshed from drinking Coke. This never happened, right? Like, you drink water if you want to hydrate, you know, or something else like that. Like, but Coca-Cola is about getting sugar, right? So, like, there's this disconnect, right? The point being is that, like, yet, despite the fact, like, if I go to drink, when I'm thirsty, I often think, oh, it'd be nice to have a soda. And then I'll go drink one, right? And that's actually me being, and this would be a phrase used, the article uses the word interpolation. That's me being hailed by social authority. That's how this language would work, right? So like, in essence, like, there is some sort of like corporate agenda popping into my head, making me think in that exact moment, right, that Coca-Cola will quench my thirst, even though I know, because it never has, that it won't. So that's kind of a good example, right? So like what feels like a natural response to us often is programmed. And actually it's the things that we have to concentratedly think about our own behavior and et cetera that isn't, right? So it's easier for us to act, right, within the panopticon. It's easier for us to act within, and this is another term, ideology, right, than it is for us to act outside of it. When we feel like we are being ourselves at our most, we're actually probably being controlled. So, okay. So the tension between control and vulnerability. Okay. Page 514. We have the tension between they spell it this way, is ability, right? Which it's the tension between invisibility and visibility. Does anybody remember kind of the feeling of some of the quotes in these sections? Do you guys want me to go through it slowly like I did the control? It's your class, I'm just a guide. Did you people have comments to make about it yet?
Well, I know this is the social media plan, I'm just looking at it again.
Yeah.
I think, well, it's talking about like, if you're not on social media, or if you don't post often, you feel invisible, or like kind of you disappear off the face of the earth. I just think that's really interesting. Because I think some people, I think over like quarantine too, we were talking about, it's kind of nice to, not disconnect from the digital side of things a little bit.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, I think sometimes just feel pressure. So it's just those two contrasting things that they feel pressured on.
Something I saw, I'm one of the millennials that migrated off of like social media, but my wife still uses it, and sometimes I'll look over her shoulder because I'm curious. But I saw a lot of people, and maybe this is people my own age, taking photos of themselves with their hair not being cut, as they're like, look at me, like I'm in quarantine, which seems really weird, right? But anyways.
I think it's kind of funny, like in the quote, because like she like social means, and like she like kind of like uses like, if I'm not on social media, then I'm not being social. But like kind of like the opposite, because like when you're using social media, like you're not really being social, because like that's not like real like socialization.
Yeah.
Like I used to be on social media, I'm not anymore. And like obviously there's kind of that fear of missing out. And I actually read the book called The Joy of Missing Out, which is really interesting. It kind of really dives into this. But like once you quit, like you realize like it's so artificial and you don't miss out on anything. Like you might miss the latest memes or something.
Yeah.
But other than that, like my life didn't change at all. Like social interactions were the exact same. And it's just interesting because you think there's so much you're gonna miss when your life literally does not change.
Yeah. And so and we're definitely picking up on that. Like, there's this idea that like, on one level you're invisible. We've seen this already, right? Like I'm editing my image, right? I'm hiding behind something. On some level I'm rendering myself invisible. But on the other end, like, I'm rendering myself visible all the time. Likewise, right? Like in a related way, right? Like, I feel like if I don't post, I cease to exist. There's a lot of people who make the claim that he pulls up on that's basically like, I'm not the same. Well, and even like this, so there's two quotes that he provides here. One is this sort of like, I'm afraid that people will forget about me if I don't post. The other, which is even more, I think, interesting, is the person has this very like constantly changing view of themselves. This sort of like weirdly existential philosophy of like, I have to post a picture of myself 2 days from now because I'm not the same person I was 2 days ago, right? So I have to have this constant stream of documentation of myself, basically, for everyone else, or I cease to like really be capturing myself and presenting the real person. Yeah, so like a lot of weird contradictions happening between visibility and invisibility. Okay, the last one, I think there's only one more. Yeah, the last one is, this is, we can unpack the title if you want to. As if post fun. Is the third theme, which is basically the tension between selfies are supposed to be fun things, right? Like every time you see a selfie, it looks fun, right? A lot of people experience a sense of having fun when they take one, right? But at the same time, like in a weird way, the selfie sort of destroys the actual experience of fun. Has anybody ever heard of, there's this thing about taking pictures of your food, adjusting how you experience it? Has anyone ever heard of this? So they've done studies that when people take pictures of their food before they eat it, the food doesn't taste as good to them. So so, and I think that's a really interesting, like if we think about that within this context, like it's sort of like people are always posting on like Snapchat, right? Snapchat is still a thing? Is that the one that's going away because we're cutting off the company from China?
TikTok.
What's that?
That's TikTok.
That's TikTok. Okay, thank you. Not being on them, they're both picture ones, right? Aren't they? Isn't TikTok?
TikTok's more like videos.
TikTok's video, Snapchat's picture?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Once again, millennial who migrated off, right? Like the last platform I used was Twitter. Was probably the last new thing that I learned to do. Anyways, so this, and you see all these pictures of people's food, but if you really think about it, it's really sad that people take pictures, post them, and that makes them not enjoy it, right? So like the fun of actually eating, which could be very visceral, actually is absconded by the image that we take of it. It's like almost like a weird version of image magic, right? And what I mean by that is like, you ever hear like, and this isn't really true, but you ever hear that like there's this mythos that primitive people think that pictures steal their soul? Which they really don't, right? But like, if you take that as an idea, right? Like it's sort of like it steals the soul of our food. Right? I'm gonna end. I still have one more thing I want to end on, so don't pack up yet. We still have a few more minutes. Did anybody catch this story of this young woman and her interaction with her boyfriend? Did anybody want to reiterate that for us? What happens in this? What does she want her boyfriend to think?
That she's like really great, like oh she's really attractive and like I should be hanging out with her right now instead of doing like whatever else I'm doing. But she's also, it's like all staged. So it's like even if he was with her, like that's not how she would really look, because if they were just gonna hang out at her house, she wouldn't like put in the funky earring and like do her makeup, or like she might, but
Yeah.
it's just like not true.
But
Like,
then-
what she was actually doing that night.
Did anybody catch what she actually did that night, though? She got dressed up, and then what did she do?
Like drank and took a bunch of pictures.
She went to a bar, a club, ordered a drink, took one picture of herself, and then went home.
Yeah.
And posted it so people could see how much fun she was having. Isn't it funny, right? And so like you're thinking about like this relationship to how we experience actual enjoyment in our lives versus like the kind of fun, right? So like in a lot of ways, like selfies ends up being like the Coca-Cola of fun, right? Like when we take pictures of selfies, it gives the image of fun. We might feel a little bit like it's fun. It might quench our thirst for fun for a few seconds, right? But rather than going out and experiencing something, we actually like often structure our lives around social media. At least some people do. I'm not saying you guys do, or like this is a universal thing, or even an age thing. Like I swear that like all the 60-year-olds I know are on social media a lot more than the 30-year-olds I know. So like, who knows? But anyway, so those are the three themes that they kind of capture. I think I'll probably pull a few more themes out of this article without talking about the article directly, so some of the theoretical stuff that it talks about, to sort of like round out our week on culture. So have a good day.